Hey everyone, Pastor Shannon here. I have with me today for some holy mischief, Bishop Sue Haupert-Johnson. Hi.
Hi. Hi,
So,
everybody.
so excited that you're here. Holy mischief is that mysterious disruption of God's love in action. It can take the place of several different types of forms. But one of the things that I have seen in sheltering in place is that one of the best things you can do to be able to do some holy mischief is to do some self-care, some time alone with God, some quiet time. And I've noticed that the bishop has been posting these Serenity Now posts on Facebook. I would love to hear a little bit about the inspiration for some of those, or where you find them.
Right. Well, I realize that anytime you're in times of great strife and struggles and there's just a new craziness every day, it seems like. And to me, I've done two things. Actually, they go in tandem. Some friends and I decided to read through the Psalms, and there are 150 Psalms. So April, we're doing 5 a day. And so the discipline so I read some in the morning and some at night, but the discipline of reading the Psalms, because the general pattern of the Psalms, a lot of them, is I'm in the midst of a horrible time. I'm beset and besieged all around. I'm in uncertain times. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm afraid. And I love how the psalmist, throughout most of the psalm will lament, pour out, just air all of this stuff. I don't know. And there's so many unknowns. I don't know. For many, I don't know where my next paycheck is coming from. I don't know how we'll ever gather again. I don't know how I'll survive without my loved ones and my church community. I don't know how. I've got a slight headache. What does that mean? I have a loved one who is ill. I have a loved one who's hospitalized. It just goes on and on and on. And so I follow the psalmist pattern and do the same thing. I just air out. These are all the things that are driving me crazy. These are things I have no control over. The doctors and the nurses and all the medical staff and the chaplains, I can't even fathom, but I feel the angst of their lives. And so I join the psalmist, and always at the end of a psalm, a huge hawk just landed outside my window. But at the end of the psalms, there's always the pivot.
Yeah.
Always the pivot. And it usually involves, okay, I remember, God, how you've provided in the past. I remember whether it's in scripture or in my life or when I felt delivered. And so I will sit and I will consciously think about horrible circumstances that God has brought me through personally, that dear friends and relationships I've had through the years, how God has delivered them. I think about all of the characters in the Bible, the stories of deliverance. I think about how many people, as pastors, I've watched so many people die. And I think even at the deliverance of death, and that is not to fear, that God is present and waiting to embrace any human being wherever they are. In life and death, I think a lot about one of my favorite affirmations of faith is the affirmation of the United Church of Canada. We are not alone. We live in God's world. In life, in death, in life beyond death, you are still God. To me, that's the kind and so I pivot with the psalmist and I think about, okay, think of how God provides. And if I really don't feel that provision, sometimes all the psalmist says is, I know you're here. I know you're here. Right. I can't make sense of this. I know you're here. I think back, I saw a great sermon recently on the dry bones passage in Ezekiel. And I think Ezekiel's response when God says, can these bones live? I love his response. He's like, and sometimes that's just where I am. God, I'm not quite sure. I can't really imagine that, but oh God, are you in these times? You know what to do. You know how to. So some of the Psalms are really open-ended. And to me, that's the great discipline. So after I read a Psalm, I also have to focus and train my mind to focus for what is beautiful, what is joyous, what is life-giving. And that's where Serenity Now came in. I'm aging myself, but I grew up on Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And so many times throughout that show, and you can go to YouTube and just type in Serenity Now and see all the clips. But in any time when they're everything's falling apart and things are crazy, they'll throw up their hands and yell Serenity Now. So
yeah.
that's what cued that. And so it just helps me. I go through social media, or I read something, or somebody sends me something, and I think, wow, that has helped my soul. So really, I thought, I'm doing that. I don't care. I'm doing this for myself selfishly. But if this helps anybody else, I'm just going to air it out. And maybe, too, they will start looking for what is life-giving and what is noble and what is beautiful, because that's what's crazy about hard times and even pandemics. There are great moments of heroism, great innovative things. I've got my Serenity Now tomorrow. They posted families doing the Hallelujah chorus and lifting up the words all over.
Yes, I saw that one. I love that.
Yeah, so
really
creativity, joy, and it's a mental exercise. One of my favorite books, life-giving books, is a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's dated, All People's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp, and he writes, this book is about his experience, and he writes about, the premise of the book is that no matter how hard the times are, the circumstances are, that we can either choose to live nobly and positively and establish meaning in that way, or we can just devolve into horrible things. And we've seen that from hoarders to protesters to, it can bring out the best in us, or it can bring out the worst in us.
It magnifies everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, I need to go read it again. I read it every few years, but because what he wrote about fellow Jews who behaved abysmally, who were horrible, and then he writes about Nazi guards who behaved nobly in horrible situations. So it just shows that we choose, and I think that's why the spiritual disciplines are important. They help me choose to embody Christ and to engage in disciplines where I invite Christ to live and move and have his being in my body. And that's important, because I think what we're looking for in times like this are people who are solid. I mean, that's what the psalmist, God is a rock, God is solid. So if we want to embody God in these times, there is a solidity and a solidness and a strength and a calmness beyond who we are. I think that's only available to us through the spiritual disciplines. And so that's important. And I say that because I was talking, I think the cabinet, we've been engaging in conversations, but people are grieving. That's all around, people are grieving. And so I think the stage of grief where we are now is anger. And, I get some letters anyhow that aren't especially friendly, but lately they've had an edge to them. But I've kind of taken them and responded in ways that are, I can see why you feel like that. I'm so sorry. But then never before have I gotten back responses. So a few times I've gotten back apologies. And one man really got to me. He said, "I'm so sorry. I look back at what I wrote to you." And he said, "My daughter's a nurse in ICU unit, and I am terrified for her. And that is just coloring everything I do." And so I think part of it is helping we need spiritual lives. We need Sabbath time to hold each other gently, and to not, everybody just seems to be in a fight, fight or flight mode, but just kind of up in arms. And it's totally natural to be angry at something you have no control over. And angry, I mean, my poor daughter's angry because she didn't get to live out her freshman year of college, and graduates don't get to live out their time. I mean, we all have disappointments and losses, and we're grieving that. So how do we move from anger to a healthy acceptance, but a way that we can celebrate at a later time, or just acknowledge that, most people think with a lot of education as a bishop, I have really a great key to pastoral care, but my usual response is, it just really sucks. And I'm sorry if that language offends somebody, but that's generally my pastoral care default. That just sucks.
Yeah.
But it sucks, but how do we move beyond it?
Well, I'm glad you said pivot, because we keep being told to pivot in how we do our work, or how we're doing school, that kind of thing. But we actually do need to pivot spiritually too. And a lot of times when people see what I do with Holy Mischief, they see the happy result, and they don't see that it's a disruption from that anger, and a pivot from grief, and a pivot to something that's healthy. I'm so glad you mentioned Sabbath, because I've heard you speak about Sabbath before. I think it's Friday, but I'm not sure, because all of the days feel really odd.
Right.
And I don't, in a sense, I think we're sometimes struggling to practice a Sabbath where we don't know how to set apart a day that already feels different. So how do you practice a Sabbath in this environment, especially when my office is 2 feet away? How do I distance myself from that?
Right. I think that it helps to understand. I think the key, for me, the key point of Sabbath is it's a set apart time to reconnect with God and to reconnect with others. And so if that's your basic understanding of Sabbath, which is rest, I mean, it's life-giving. And a lot of our work is not life-giving. A lot of it is hectic, a lot of it is frenzied. And so I don't really look at, when all days blend together, I would say you're looking to set apart an hour. I'll start with 5 minutes. I mean, you really do. I think it's something that you carefully carve out, but you're gentle with how you use it. So generally, when I usually have a normal day of Sabbath, I use it to connect with God, to read, sometimes I'll just, I like to play the piano, sing some hymns, sing some music that I find life-giving. Sometimes I will, people, years ago I preached on Sabbath, and I said, I can't do this now, but sometimes I would just go to Home Depot and wander around and look at and marvel at, there are people who know how to use every one of these types of screws and nails. I don't understand electricity. How miraculous is that? So part of Sabbath is to create time and space to wonder at creation. I think the gift is you can go sit on your back porch. You have time. I mean, that's how, it's kind of funny. I've watched how our family we kind of rotate, and part of the rotation of our day, because Sam's in class and watching and Alan's working, but for our Sabbath time, I noticed that each of us has a part of the day when we hit the back porch, and we just watch the birds, and we watch nature, and we get some sun, and we just, so even, I would say, set apart a room, set apart a place, set apart, to me, the back porch has always been my sacred place. So I would say Sabbath is more about intentionality than rules.
That is my word that God has given me this week.
Yeah.
Because I have loved having a different pace and having more time with my family, more meals with my family.
Right.
And I've loved that, but I've also loved the innovation that's happened and all of the new things that we're kind of pushing the limits of, which I think has been good and creative. And I would love for those to continue when shelter in place is over. And God's like, well, you just have to be intentional about both of those. So that word's been resonating. What about people who live alone and want to practice Sabbath, but the quiet is actually too quiet?
Yeah, well, they have a phone. And many times in Sabbath, I mean, the other thing I do on Sabbath is I try to write cards. I try to call people I haven't been in touch with. So that's the relational part of it. And so I would, and it's been fun. I mean, every Thursday, the women of the cabinet get together on Zoom at 4:30, and we just share life and chat. I have my covenant group is getting together today. it's about intentionality. It's
Yeah.
about, and when the walls close in on you and you're going stark raving mad, but on that same, you can do that alone in a house, or you can easily with people in your house, family members, get to a point where you're on your last nerve as well. So I would say, be intentional and be in touch with different people.
Yeah.
FaceTime, you can put 4 on with FaceTime. I mean, there's ways to do it,
Right.
but I do think you have part of it, and you can do that as part of your Sabbath. Just pray and see who God brings to your mind. I mean, nobody enjoys more. Everybody's stuck at home. I mean, that's
right.
the crazy part of this. So I remember, some days I'll think, oh, I wonder if, should I call so-and-so? I wonder if they're home. And I'm like, of course they're home.
Right, they're home.
So if you're alone in your house, people are at home, so call them. So
Yeah.
I think part of it is, what does my soul need, and being in touch with that. And so I think a big part of Sabbath is just taking inventory of where you are spiritually.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get so busy and caught up and frenzied that we lose track. And this is where I see a lot of folks come unwound. You're so tired, you don't realize it. You're so in need of help, you don't realize it. You're so in need of quiet and time to think, you don't. So I think that part of quiet time is figuring out what you need, and what person do you need? I mean, I remember last week I was just in a weird funk, and I thought, who could really help me through this? And I went through my usual folks. I'm like, that's just not. And finally, I think the Holy Spirit brought to mind, this is who you need to talk to. So I called them and talked to them for an hour. So I think you have time and space, or invest yourself in writing notes or going through old pictures. I mean, you have time to create some time to do things that you've been meaning to do for a long time. I mean, a friend the other day, he sent me, he's a clergyman, retired, and he and his wife, and he wrote, it was funny, tongue in cheek, but he emailed me and he said, hey, I my wife and I are going through our stuff. We figure if COVID kills us, our kids aren't going to want to deal with all this stuff. And if it doesn't kill us, we will feel much better in our house if it's organized. And then he attached to it a letter I'd written to him in 1995 that he'd found going through his stuff. He had been a scholarship donor to the seminary, and I had written him a thank you note. And it was so wild to look back at my 1995 handwriting on the stationery of the church I was serving. But, to go through stuff it really was helpful to just see that and to think of that time. So maybe this is a time, especially if you're alone, go through old pictures, go through, if you want to think about God in your life, great memories, and and if I'm going to die tomorrow, I've gotten to the point, and this might be morbid, but sometimes I go through the head and all the saints who are already across the bar. So who's waiting for me? And I know in my last days on my deathbed, I will be thinking of them in my head. And sadly, when you get to move in on 60 years old, quite a few people across the bar. Yeah. But that, to me, that's a spiritual response. None of us are going to get out of this alive. Right. Whether it's pandemic or, whether we live another 20 years or 50 years or 80 years. Part of this pandemic, I think, makes us assess. I love the psalm that says, teach me to number my days. So I live with an awareness that time is not unlimited, it's precious. And also I reflect with joy on those who have spoken into my life, who've died, who are waiting. Yeah. So there's a lot of rich spiritual work to do in this time.
I love that. Love that. Okay. So I've got a few fun questions for you.
Okay.
All right. So what were the 1, 2, or 3 top things that you decided you needed to grab from your conference office to take home to shelter in place?
Right. You know what? Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. The reality is I live in a virtual world. And so my calendars on my electronics, but all my calendar, all my, I have, I don't know, it's weird. I have things that are meaningful to me here in my study here, and things that are meaningful at the office. So I didn't feel any need to transfer them. I have duplicate, actually my bigger libraries at home, so I didn't need to grab any of that. And, you know, I have, God knows I got books of discipline and books of worship and Bibles in each place. So I have pretty much, you know, I'm pretty much stocked the same way at home as I am the office.
Okay.
So,
I took the New Interpreters, just the Gospels. So
see, I had that all at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that lives at home. So,
So,
because I have a spouse who needs them too.
oh,
So
okay.
he gets very upset if I take resource books to the office. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. I
Okay.
don't want to live that.
So you're going to be on a Zoom call with Jesus. What do you choose for your virtual background?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe like the whole cabinet behind me. There's a lot of spiritual power there.
Well, that's true.
Just being in their presence, maybe he'd be like, okay, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Okay. And then this one is one that for some reason, the Peachtree City United Methodist Church staff asks new people all the time. We don't, do you put your ketchup in the refrigerator or the pantry?
The refrigerator.
Okay. There's no right or wrong answer on that.
That's just, you know, I probably because that's how my parents did it.
That's what,
so
yeah.
That's where I've always gone to get it.
We're kind of split on our staff. There's a few that keep it in the pantry. So, well, it has been wonderful to hear from you. And I know that there are people who are in that stages of grief, and they are needing to find ways to connect to God and to move towards something that is more healing. So thank you so much. And your Holy Mischief Challenge. Because I just heard you say you played piano.
Yeah.
Maybe like a nice little Facebook video of you playing piano.
Oh, that's something I should never have let out. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
Okay. We'll see. All right. Well, thank you so much. Bye, everybody.